The most dangerous wedding in Korean Mafia history had one rule. Nobody gets in without being searched. Nobody gets out without being cleared. And nobody gets close to Seo Junho without earning that right through years of blood and loyalty. They checked every guest, screened every bottle, sealed every exit. They forgot to check one thing. The little girl in the flower girl dress sitting quietly at the back of the hall. The one nobody looked at twice. The one too small to be a threat. The one who had been watching, really watching, since the moment she walked through those doors. Because while every trained soldier in that room stood frozen when the most feared mafia boss in Korea hit the floor, she was already moving. She already had a plan. And tucked inside the pocket of her tiny white dress was the only thing standing between Seo Junho and death. This is the story of what one little girl saw that no one else did, and what she chose to do about it alone. Before we go 1 second further, if you are new to this channel, subscribe right now because we do not do ordinary stories here. And I need you to drop a comment immediately and tell me, what do you think a little girl is about to do in a room full of Korean mafia? Because whatever you're imagining, you are not ready. Alright, let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what Mila did, you need to understand the world she walked into. Seo Junho did not inherit power. He did not grow into it gently, nor did he negotiate for it in quiet rooms filled with polite men. He carved it out of violence, out of loyalty tested in blood, out of decisions no ordinary person could live with. By the age of 32, his name was no longer just a name. It was a warning whispered in dockyards, gambling rooms, and private clubs from Busan to Tokyo. Deals stopped when he entered a room. Voices lowered. Eyes dropped. Even men who hated him respected the gravity of his presence, because Seo Junho did not make threats. He made endings. In his world, betrayal was not punished. It was erased so completely that it was as if the traitor had never existed at all. He trusted discipline. He trusted silence. He trusted fear. Those three pillars built an empire that law enforcement could not penetrate and rival syndicates could not destabilize. His lieutenants obeyed him without hesitation. His soldiers moved with mechanical precision. And his enemies learned quickly that patience was their only chance of survival. What he did not trust, what he had never allowed himself to need, was love. Love created leverage. Love created vulnerability. Love created doors enemies could walk through. For 15 years, Seo Junho sealed every door. Then Camille Harper walked into his life and behaved as if none of those doors existed. She did not bow her head when they met. She did not measure her words. She did not study him the way others did, searching for danger in every flicker of his expression. She laughed too easily, asked him questions no one else dared to ask, sat across from him at dinner, and met his eyes as if he were simply a man finishing a long day, not a legend written in blood. At first, his men watched her carefully. Then they watched him, because something impossible was happening. One evening, in a private dining room overlooking the Han River, Camille said something so unexpected, so disarmingly honest, that Seo Junho leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not a polite exhale, not a calculated chuckle, a real laugh, deep, unguarded, and startling enough that the two bodyguards stationed at the door exchanged a glance they would never speak of. Word spread through his organization within hours. The boss had laughed. Because of a woman. When news broke that Seo Junho was getting married, the underworld did not celebrate. It went still. Alliances paused. Rivals listened. Old enemies resurfaced in whispers and speculation. A man like Seo Junho did not fall in love. A man like Seo Junho did not open his heart. And if he had, then somewhere in the shadows, someone would already be calculating how to step through the door he had finally unlocked. Camille Harper did not enter rooms the way other women did. She didn't pause at the threshold to measure the atmosphere, didn't hesitate under the weight of watchful eyes or guarded silence. She walked in as if she belonged wherever she chose to stand. Warmth followed her, not the loud, performative kind meant to impress, but something quieter, the kind that made people forget to be afraid for a moment. She listened when people spoke, remembered small details others dismissed, thanked waiters by name, laughed easily, without calculation. In a world where every word carried intention and every gesture concealed motive, Camille's openness felt disarming, almost unreal. To Seo Junho's men, she was an anomaly. To Junho himself, she was a disruption he found he did not want to correct. She asked him once, over tea instead of whiskey, whether he ever grew tired of being obeyed. He studied her for a long moment before answering. Obedience keeps people alive. And does it keep them close? She asked softly. He did not respond. But he did not end the conversation either. Where Camille brought warmth, Mila brought silence. She was 8 years old and moved through Junho's world like a small shadow, present, observant, and easily overlooked by those who did not understand what they were seeing. She spoke politely when spoken to, her voice soft but steady. She never fidgeted, never demanded attention, never behaved like a child trying to claim space in a room that intimidated adults. Instead, she watched. At dinners, while adults spoke in careful tones, Mila studied the seating arrangement. Who sat closest to Junho? Who waited to speak? Who avoided eye contact? She noticed the subtle nods exchanged between lieutenants, the way security positioned themselves near exits, the silent choreography of protection and control. She watched Junho most of all, not with fear, with focus. At first, he did not know what to do with her presence. Children were unpredictable variables in a world that survived on precision. He acknowledged her with polite distance, a nod, a brief question about school, an occasional gift delivered through an aide. But Mila never treated him like a myth. She thanked him directly, looked him in the eye, accepted his gestures with quiet sincerity instead of awe. One evening, during a private dinner, she noticed he had not touched his food. "You don't have to finish it," she said gently. "But you should eat something. My mom says people make worse decisions when they're hungry." Camille froze, mortified. Junho stared at the girl across the table. Then, slowly, he picked up his chopsticks. After that, something shifted. He began asking her small questions. What she liked to read. Whether she preferred the city lights or the sound of rain. If she missed her old school. Their conversations were brief, almost formal, yet they accumulated weight in ways neither of them acknowledged. What no one else saw was the way Mila studied everything around her with quiet intensity, as if memorizing the architecture of a world she already understood mattered. Not out of curiosity, out of preparation. The wedding was staged as if the world itself had been invited to witness history. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light across a hall dressed in ivory silk and white orchids flown in from 3 continents. A string quartet played with restrained elegance from a raised marble balcony, their music floating above the low murmur of voices that carried accents from every corner of the underworld. Diamonds flashed. Silk whispered. Every table held men and women whose names were spoken carefully in private rooms and never written down. This was not simply a wedding. It was a summit disguised as celebration. Security began 3 blocks away. Vehicles were inspected, mirrors sliding beneath chassis, trained eyes checking seams and door panels. Inside the perimeter, guests passed through biometric scanners and discreet pat-downs performed by men in tailored suits whose calm professionalism concealed lethal efficiency. On the mezzanine level, additional surveillance teams monitored thermal imaging feeds and facial recognition overlays. Every exit was manned. Every service corridor guarded. Every bottle opened in the hall had been screened twice. No one entered this room by accident. Seo Junho stood near the ceremonial platform in a black suit cut with surgical precision, his posture relaxed but his awareness absolute. Around him, his lieutenants formed an invisible perimeter, men who did not appear to be watching anything, yet missed nothing. A slight turn of a wrist signaled readiness. A subtle shift of weight communicated clearance. Their choreography was silent, disciplined, perfected through years of surviving threats most people never imagined. Near the bride, Camille's personal assistant moved with quiet efficiency, smoothing fabric, adjusting the train of the gown, whispering timing cues with professional calm. She kept close enough to anticipate needs before they were spoken, close enough to remain indispensable without ever becoming visible. Her expression never changed, even when guests of intimidating reputation leaned in with congratulatory smiles that did not reach their eyes. At the back of the hall, almost absorbed into the soft glow of candlelight, Mila sat perfectly still. Her flower girl dress spread neatly around her knees, hands folded in her lap, posture composed in a way no one thought remarkable, because no one was looking long enough to notice. Her eyes moved steadily, not nervously, tracing pathways between tables, exits, security placements, service doors, sight lines. She watched who spoke to whom, who avoided whom, who entered late, and who left early. The hall unfolded in her mind like a map being drawn in real time. Up front, the ceremony neared its final ritual. The ceremonial wine was brought forward on a polished silver tray. The music softened. The room leaned into silence. Every exit is sealed. Every guest has been searched. Every bottle of wine was inspected by Junho's personal security team. There is no way, no possible way, that anyone got poison into that hall. And yet, if the tension is already getting to you, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who loves a story that makes their jaw drop. Because the glass is being raised and everything is about to change. Back to the story. The music swells. The hall goes quiet. And CO Junho raises his glass. The hall seemed to inhale as Camille Harper stepped forward. Her gown moved like quiet water across the marble floor, silk whispering in soft folds of ivory and pearl. The light caught the delicate embroidery at her shoulders, scattering faint reflections across the polished aisle, as if she carried her own constellation with her. Every eye followed her, not with suspicion now, but with a kind of stunned recognition. She did not look like someone stepping into power. She looked like someone stepping into a promise. CO Junho watched her approach, and for the first time since he had built an empire out of discipline and fear, the world saw something unguarded move across his face. Not weakness, not hesitation, recognition. When she reached him, she did not bow her head. She did not lower her gaze. She took his hands as if they belonged there, as if the distance he had spent a lifetime constructing had never existed. The officiant's voice carried through the hall, measured, ceremonial, precise, but the words themselves seemed to dissolve in the space between them. Guests listened. Lieutenants observed. Rivals measured vulnerability in the angle of Junho's shoulders and the stillness of his guards. But what they witnessed was not leverage. It was surrender of a different kind. When Camille spoke her vows, her voice was steady, warm, unadorned by theatrics. She did not speak of power or protection. She spoke of partnership, of standing beside someone whose life demanded hardness and choosing, every day, to bring him back to the world of ordinary human breath. When it was Junho's turn, a pause spread through the room. He was a man whose words could start wars. Now he searched for ones that would not break in his hands. I have lived my life, he said slowly, believing that strength meant never needing anyone. The silence deepened. You showed me strength can also mean trusting someone to stand beside you. Camille's eyes shimmered, but she did not look away. In the back of the hall, Mila watched the exchange without blinking. Around her, adults saw romance, alliance, spectacle. Mila saw something else. The exact moment a man who had survived by trusting no one chose to trust. Something inside her settled into place. Not a new decision. The confirmation of one already made. She studied the distance between the platform and the nearest exit. Counted the steps between tables. Noted the assistant near her mother's shoulder. The positioning of security near the service doors, the tray resting in the hands of a uniformed attendant waiting at the edge of the ceremonial space. The music swelled gently, strings rising like a held breath finally released. The officiant signaled the final ritual. A polished silver tray was brought forward, bearing 2 crystal glasses filled with ceremonial wine. The liquid caught the chandelier light in deep ruby reflections, trembling slightly with each measured step of the attendant. Junho accepted one glass. Camille accepted the other. The hall leaned forward into stillness. At the back, Mila rose quietly to her feet, her small hands resting at her sides, her gaze fixed not on the couple, but on the glass in CO Junho's hand as the music climbed, and the moment arrived. The crystal chandelier light fractured across 100 raised glasses as the toast reached its final note. Seo Junho stood at the center of it all, empire contained in a tailored suit, silence bending toward him, every powerful eye waiting for the sip that would seal alliances and bury rivalries. He lifted the glass. The violinist held the last trembling note. He drank. The glass slipped from his fingers. It struck marble and exploded into glittering shards. For one impossible second, no one understood what they were seeing. Then Junho's knees buckled. His body hit the floor with a dull, final sound that silenced the orchestra mid-breath. Screams tore through the hall. Chairs scraped violently. Armed guards surged forward, weapons drawn, sealing exits with mechanical precision. Doors slammed. Steel locks engaged. Guests were shoved back as security formed a tightening perimeter around the fallen boss. Seal every exit. No one leaves. Doctors forced their way through the crush of silk and black suits, dropping to their knees, fingers already searching for a pulse. Camille's scream cut through the chaos. She fell beside him, her hands trembling against his chest, white wedding sleeves soaking against the marble as she begged him to wake up, her voice breaking into raw panic. Foam gathered at the corner of Junho's mouth. A doctor shouted for space. Another yelled for oxygen. No one noticed the small figure already moving. Mila did not hesitate. She did not look afraid. She ran. She slipped between armed men frozen by protocol, ducked under an outstretched arm, and dropped to her knees beside Junho before anyone could stop her. "Move," she screamed. Her voice did not sound like a child's. Camille reached for the fallen glass stem still clutched in her hand. Mila struck it away. The crystal skittered across the marble. "Don't let him swallow," Mila shouted. Hands shaking, she forced Junho's jaw open, ignoring the doctor's startled protest. Her small fingers worked with frightening precision, sweeping inside his mouth. "Hold him." A guard froze, then obeyed. Mila reached into the pocket sewn into the lining of her small dress. Gasps rippled outward. She pulled out a tiny glass vial. Clear. Empty. Proof. The hall froze. Even the shouting stopped. Every soldier in that room had a weapon. Every doctor had training. Every lieutenant had years of experience in crisis. And not one of them, not one, had what this little girl had in her pocket. If this story is already shocking you, smash that like button and share it right now. And comment below, did you see this coming? Because most people didn't. Most people never do. Now let's get back to it. Because the hall has gone completely silent, and Mila Harper is about to start talking. No one spoke. The cavernous wedding hall, moments ago filled with shouting, commands, and panic, seemed to shrink around the small girl kneeling beside the most feared man in the room. The vial trembled slightly between Mila's fingers, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of finally letting go. A doctor hovered beside her. Guards stood frozen. Camille remained on the marble floor, her face drained of color, eyes fixed on the tiny piece of glass that had stopped to death. Mila swallowed. "I saw it," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. No one interrupted. Her gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the chandeliers and silk banners, back into a quieter world no one in that hall had ever noticed. "My mom works in the kitchen," she continued. "She cleans after the cooks leave. She tells me to stay under the prep table so nobody gets angry." The words came slowly, carefully, as though each one had to cross something sharp before reaching the air. "Last night, 2 men came in after midnight. They weren't cooks. They whispered. They thought nobody was there." Her fingers tightened around the vial. They had a small packet. White powder. One of them kept checking the door. The other one opened the ceremonial wine case. Several heads turned toward the banquet tables. I watched him tip the powder into one bottle. He shook it, swirled it, then wiped the neck clean. A ripple of disbelief moved through the guards. "I wanted to tell my mom," Mila whispered. "But she saw them too." Her voice broke for the first time. She grabbed my wrist so tight it hurt. She shook her head. She was crying without making any sound. Silence deepened. She said if we spoke, we would disappear. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mila inhaled shakily before continuing. "This morning, the bottles were locked away. I thought maybe I imagined it. I thought maybe it was nothing. Her eyes lifted briefly toward Junho's motionless face. But when I went to bring flowers to the bride's dressing room, I saw the case open. A guard's jaw tightened. One bottle was sitting by itself on the vanity table, away from the others. She closed her eyes, remembering. I picked it up. It smelled bitter, like metal. Her hand drifted to the pocket where the vial had been hidden. I poured some into this. I didn't know what else to do. Her voice dropped to a whisper so soft the hall leaned toward her to hear it. I waited. I watched. I tried to tell someone, but everyone looked too important to interrupt. The tiny confession landed harder than any accusation. I thought if I was wrong, I would get in trouble. She looked down at Junho again, tears gathering but not falling. But if I was right? The little girl's shoulders trembled under the weight of hours spent carrying terror alone in a room full of power. And in that vast hall of armed men, silk, and empire, they finally understood how long she had been holding the truth by herself. The silence that followed Mila's confession did not break all at once. It fractured slowly, like ice under weight. A senior lieutenant leaned toward the security commander, whispering sharply. Orders moved in low, urgent currents. Radios crackled. 2 guards peeled away from the perimeter and strode toward the banquet tables where the ceremonial bottles had been displayed. Another team moved toward the service corridor. Within seconds, a young man in a charcoal suit, the bride's personal assistant, was dragged into the open space before the altar. His face had gone gray, his eyes darting wildly between armed men and the unconscious figure on the floor. I didn't do anything, he stammered. I only handled the schedule. On your knees, a guard ordered. He obeyed. A small plastic evidence bag containing the remaining ceremonial bottles was placed on the marble floor. One slot was empty. The hall watched the pieces align. You had access, the lieutenant said coldly. I just delivered the case to the dressing room, the assistant cried. That's all. Gasps rippled through the guests. Murmurs swelled. The explanation felt complete, neat, almost merciful in its simplicity. A single compromised link. A single traitor. A crisis contained. Handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Camille sagged with visible relief, her shoulders collapsing inward as though the weight of terror had finally lifted. Several guests began to breathe again. A few even lowered their phones. Justice, swift and efficient, had restored order. Paramedics continued working over Junho, their movements steadier now, oxygen flowing, antidote preparations underway. His pulse, faint but present, flickered beneath their fingers. The Empire would survive. The assistant was hauled to his feet. Security began escorting him toward the sealed exit doors. And in the widening calm, people started to believe the danger had passed. But Mila did not move. She stood beside Junho, her small hands hanging at her sides, her face drained not of fear, but of certainty. Her eyes followed the assistant, then shifted. Slowly, deliberately, her arm began to rise. At first, no one noticed. The motion was too small, too quiet against the machinery of control reasserting itself. But the lieutenant saw it and frowned. A guard paused mid-step. Mila's finger extended. It did not point at the man in handcuffs. It moved past him, past the guards, past the lieutenants. It settled on the woman in the white dress still kneeling on the marble floor. On the bride. On her mother. On Camille. A sound escaped someone in the crowd. A strangled inhale that seemed to suck the air from the entire hall. Camille's head lifted slowly. Her eyes met Mila's. And for the first time since the glass shattered, the terror on her face was no longer grief. It was recognition. Security has the assistant. The case is closed. Everyone in that hall exhales. The villain has been caught. Justice is done. Except, Mila hasn't moved. She's still standing there. Still watching. And her hand is slowly rising. If you are not on the edge of your seat right now, check your pulse. Like this video. Share it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds will change everything you thought you knew about this story. Back to the story. The assistant is in handcuffs. The hall is almost calm. And Mila's finger is pointing at the bride. Camille's composure shattered in the span of a single heartbeat. Her knees, which had clung to the polished marble as if the floor itself could anchor her sanity, buckled beneath the weight of revelation. The hall was silent, the air thick with tension and disbelief, as every eye followed Mila's small, unwavering finger. She ordered it, Camille whispered, her voice breaking like glass. 3 words, yet they carried the force of a hurricane. The lieutenants, trained in reading threats, exchanged uneasy glances. Security froze mid-step, unsure whether to intervene or step back. Even the guests, who had expected drama, weren't prepared for this moment of raw, human truth. Tears streaked Camille's face, smudging her makeup into sharp, jagged lines. It was not the cold calculation of a criminal undone, but the desperate unraveling of a woman trapped by the orders of others and the consequences of her own choices. She sank fully to the floor, her hands clawing at her head, murmuring fragments of denial and fear. I didn't, her voice cracked again. I didn't love him. I never loved him. I was sent. I was a weapon. Her confession resonated through the hall, each syllable landing like a weighty stone. Junho's lieutenants stiffened. Some shifted uneasily, realizing that what they thought was a simple act of betrayal was instead the final act of a much larger, more insidious plan. He, the man whose empire had been built on manipulation and fear, had been targeted in a way no amount of strategy could fully predict. And yet, even in the center of this revelation, Mila's presence altered everything. The little girl had been watching, calculating, seeing through layers of deception that even seasoned operatives would have missed. Her eyes were fixed on Camille, on the trembling figure whose hands had poured poison into the vessel meant to end a life. Mila had borne witness to every step of the plan, the hushed conversations in the kitchen, the secret exchanges, the powder tipped with precise intent. She had understood the danger long before anyone else had. Camille's mother remained frozen in her chair, a silent spectator to the chaos, unable to speak, unable to reconcile love for her daughter with the horror of what had been orchestrated. The truth, as it emerged, was devastating in its clarity. The bride had never been a participant by choice. She had been a pawn, a living weapon aimed straight at the heart of Junho's world. And yet Mila had already made her decision. Nobody had accounted for Mila. Nobody ever accounted for Mila. Her small hand, steady and unshaken, signaled not just accusation, but judgment. In that instant, she became the arbiter of consequences, the voice of clarity cutting through the lies and fear. Every breath in the hall seemed suspended, waiting for the next movement, the next word, the next decision, a stillness that felt as fragile as a heartbeat. The empire, the ceremony, the power games, all had been eclipsed by the courage of a child who saw what everyone else could not. The hall was almost empty now, echoing with the faint hum of distant conversations as the last of the shocked guests were ushered away. Only Junho's most trusted men remained, forming a silent perimeter around the scene, their eyes darting between the fallen glass, the abandoned bottle, and the small figure who had altered the course of events. Mila stood at the center, tears streaking her cheeks, her chest heaving with exhaustion and adrenaline. Junho rose slowly, his movements deliberate, as if every step across the polished marble carried the weight of the near catastrophe. His suit, disheveled, sleeves rolled slightly, hair damp with sweat, did not mask the commanding presence that had once frozen entire rooms with a glance. Yet now, it was tempered by a vulnerability that none had ever seen. His eyes, usually steely and unyielding, softened as they found Mila. He knelt before her, the cold authority of the Korean Mafia boss replaced by a quiet humility. "Why?" he asked, his voice low but carrying through the stillness, a question not just about action, but about trust, courage, and understanding. Mila, barely 8, seemed to shrink beneath the enormity of the gaze, the weight of the empire, the ghosts of what almost happened. She looked up, eyes wide, glistening with tears, and whispered the words that would change everything. "You were going to be my dad." For a long moment, Junho said nothing. The words hung in the air, fragile and powerful, more binding than any oath or contract. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his arms. Mila hesitated, then stepped forward, the last traces of fear melting into relief and trust. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in his life, Seo Junho allowed himself to cry. Not for loss, not for betrayal, not for the empire he had built on fear and blood, but for the connection, the choice, the bond that no power, no manipulation, no threat could ever break. His lieutenants, standing rigidly behind him, exchanged glances, understanding that this moment transcended protocol, tradition, and hierarchy. The boss who had commanded loyalty through intimidation had found it in an 8-year-old girl, and it had nothing to do with fear or power. It was earned in courage, clarity, and love. The marble floor beneath them reflected not just the grand chandeliers above, but the profound gravity of the moment. A child's decision outweighing a calculated plan, a life saved by instinct and heart, a world shifted by a single, simple truth. And in that embrace, Junho understood that loyalty, trust, and family were not inherited or commanded, they were chosen. The room seemed to breathe again, the tension dissolving into quiet awe. A man who had survived wars, betrayals, and assassins was finally undone, not by violence, but by a choice, a confession, and a little girl who refused to be powerless. Seo Junho survived wars. He survived assassination attempts. He survived an empire built on betrayal and blood. But he had never, not once in his entire life, been chosen. Not like this. Not by someone who had every reason to stay silent. An 8-year-old girl, alone, afraid, armed with nothing but a vial and a decision, chose him. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if it gave you chills, if it reminded you that the most powerful thing in any room is always love, then like this video right now, share it with someone who needs to feel something real today, and subscribe to this channel because we bring you stories that live in your chest long after they're over. Drop a comment and tell me, could you have done what Mila did? I want to know. I read every single one.